At exactly 11:14 a.m. on January 11, 1944, in the skies over Oschersleben, Germany, Major James Howard faced a breath-stopping situation. From an altitude of over 6,000 meters, he watched as 30 German fighters plunged downward like arrows, aiming straight at a formation of 60 B-17 bombers that had been left completely without protection. At 33 years old, Howard possessed the hardened resolve of a legend, having flown 86 combat missions with the famed Flying Tigers in China. However, this battle carried an entirely different tone. It was only the 37th day he had flown the P-51B Mustang, a controversial new fighter that many military leaders still doubted at the time, even viewing long-range escort missions with this aircraft as a form of suicide. The mission of James Howard and his Mustang at that moment carried decisive significance for the air war. During 1943 to 1944, the skies over Europe became the most dangerous airspace for bomber formations. Despite their rugged design, B-17 flying fortresses were too slow and vulnerable to German fighters once they penetrated deep into enemy territory without escort. Losses during this period were catastrophic. In just the final 4 months of 1943, the U.S. Army lost as many as 180 bombers. The worst tragedy occurred on October 14, 1943, later known as Black Thursday, when 60 B-17s were destroyed in a single day, killing 600 airmen. The losses were so severe that the United States even considered halting daylight bombing altogether, despite it being a core strategy to cripple Nazi Germany's war-making capacity. Amid this desperate situation, the P-51B Mustang emerged as a new ray of hope. Powered by the formidable Packard Merlin engine, the aircraft had exceptional range, allowing it to escort bomber formations for the entire mission, something earlier fighters like the P-47 or P-38 could not achieve. Yet in early 1944, the Mustang's real combat effectiveness remained an unknown. Howard's 354th Fighter Group, known as the Pioneer Mustang Group, became the first unit tasked with proving the aircraft's worth in Europe. James Howard's talent lay not only in courage, but also in his unique technical foundation. A former Navy pilot, his experience landing on aircraft carriers gave him exceptional mastery of rudder control. This became his secret weapon, enabling him to execute tight turns and unpredictable maneuvers that even the most seasoned Luftwaffe pilots could not anticipate. On his Mustang, bearing serial number 436315, Howard proudly painted the words Ding Hao, a Chinese phrase he learned during his time with the Flying Tigers, meaning very good, excellent, or number one. For Howard, Ding Hao was not merely a friendly slogan shared between American pilots and their Chinese comrades. It was a declaration of absolute faith in himself, in his teammates, and in the machine he flew. On the morning of January 11, 1944, in the freezing skies over Germany, that faith was pushed to its absolute limit. In a moment of life and death, James Howard became the only American fighter pilot standing between 600 comrades and the attack of 30 ferocious Nazi hunters. On the morning of January 11, 1944, despite the cold and gloomy weather over the English Channel, a strategic mission was launched. More than 60 B-17 flying fortresses from the 401st Bomb Group took off from England, heading straight east. Their target was the Focke-Wulf aircraft factory at Oschersleben, located more than 300 miles deep inside Germany. This was a critical link in the campaign to cripple the Nazi Air Force and pave the way for the future Normandy invasion. More than 600 men aboard the B-17 formations fully understood the danger of the mission. Oschersleben lay far beyond the protective range of conventional escort fighters at the time. This was precisely the moment for the P-51B Mustang to prove its real combat value. Escort duty was assigned to the 354th Fighter Group, the Pioneer Mustang Group. Major James Howard led a 4-ship flight, taking up a defensive position behind and above the bomber formation. Inside the cockpit of Ding Hao, Howard felt a distinct tension despite his extensive experience with the Flying Tigers. This was no longer a series of scattered skirmishes. It was the first time the P-51B would directly confront the Luftwaffe's most disciplined and elite interceptor forces over enemy territory. The early phase of the mission proceeded relatively smoothly as the formation pushed deeper into hostile airspace. But at an altitude exceeding 6,000 meters, the true hardship began. Temperatures plunged to minus 42 degrees Celsius. The bitter cold fogged cockpit canopies, made metal brittle, and left machine guns constantly on the verge of jamming. On the ground, German radar had already detected the incoming force. More than 30 Luftwaffe fighters took off from airfields around Brunswick, silently tracking the bomber formation for 18 minutes as they waited for the perfect moment to strike. As the B-17s neared their target, a small group of German fighters suddenly attacked from the side. Acting on instinct, Howard's four-ship flight immediately broke off to intercept. After neutralizing this threat, however, Howard realized a harsh reality. His formation had been scattered. In the brief, violent dogfight, his wingmen had chased enemy aircraft in different directions, and the radio now carried nothing but static and unanswered calls. From an altitude of 24,000 feet, Howard looked down and saw a living nightmare. More than 30 German fighters had formed up in perfect order and were beginning to pour fire into the slow-moving B-17 formation below. The bombers named Little Chum and Hell's Angels began trailing thick black smoke after the enemy's first bursts of gunfire. The B-17 formation was now completely exposed, with only Howard in his Ding Hao standing between a pack of vicious wolves and 600 comrades on the brink of disaster. Facing this perilous situation, the B-17s hastily tightened their formation to concentrate defensive fire. Gunners in the turrets strained their eyes, fully aware that without fighter cover, these slow-flying fortresses were nothing more than easy prey for the battle-hardened wolves of the Luftwaffe. Meanwhile, it would take at least another 37 minutes before the formation could reach a safe zone where P-47 Thunderbolts might be able to come to their aid.
James Howard's predicament lay completely outside all established military rules. Escort doctrine at the time was extremely strict. Fighters were to stay close to the bombers for passive defense, and if outnumbered by more than a 1-to-2 ratio, pilots were ordered to disengage immediately to preserve their forces. Yet Howard was facing an unthinkable ratio, 1 against more than 30. Any tactical textbook would advise turning back to save one's life. Caught between his own survival and the lives of hundreds of comrades, the 33-year-old commander stood before a decision that would pass into history. But Howard did not turn back. Watching black smoke rise from the B-17s and hearing desperate cries for help crackling over the radio, he knew that if he withdrew, hundreds of his fellow airmen would never have a chance to return home. At that moment, he was the only American fighter still holding position, a lone shield standing between 600 men and a bloodthirsty pack of more than 30 Luftwaffe wolves. The solitary confrontation that would enter history had officially begun. The moment Howard shoved the throttle forward, the P-51B Ding Hao plunged from 24,000 feet like a silver arrow. Diving at speeds exceeding 675 kilometers per hour, the wind shrieked past the wings with a terrifying howl. At such velocity, compressibility effects began to appear, causing the aircraft to shudder lightly as it approached its physical limits, yet Howard maintained perfect control. Far from acting blindly, Howard drew on every ounce of experience from his days with the Flying Tigers to gain the upper hand. He skillfully approached out of the sun, using the blinding glare to blind German pilots while exploiting altitude to store energy for lightning-fast disengagements. The first target to enter his sights was a Focke-Wulf FW-190 leading the attacking group. Before the German pilot even understood what was happening, the 6.50 caliber machine guns mounted in the wings of Ding Hao erupted in unison. With a terrifying rate of fire, streams of tracer rounds converged, carrying enough energy to tear through the armor of any fighter. In an instant, the FW-190 became a ball of fire, marking the opening shot of an unimaginable solo battle. The initial burst slammed into the tail of the FW-190, immediately engulfing it in black smoke as it spiraled downward out of control. Howard then hauled back hard on the stick, his body subjected to inertial forces reaching 7 Gs, an extreme load that drained blood from the brain and temporarily narrowed his vision. Even so, with the discipline of a naval aviator, he quickly regained clarity, kicked the rudder into a sharp turn, and lined up his second target, a Messerschmitt Bf-109 that was tightly pursuing a wounded B-17. The second burst rang out with deadly precision, punching straight into the enemy cockpit. The windshield shattered, and the Bf-109 staggered, spewing thick white smoke from its engine before dropping away in free fall. Howard did not waste a single second admiring the kill. He immediately executed a spectacular inverted roll to chase down a third FW-190, attempting to escape.
In just 40 brief seconds, 3 German fighters were knocked out of the fight. From below, the B-17 turret gunners watched in stunned silence. They had never witnessed a lone fighter attack with such ferocity and precision. To them, Howard's silver Mustang was like an immortal ghost appearing out of the sun itself. The remaining 27-plus German fighters began to recognize the real threat posed by this solitary spoiler. The Luftwaffe formation reacted immediately. Half continued their attack on the bombers, while the other half turned to swarm Howard. With an overwhelming ratio of 15-1, the Germans were confident the Mustang would soon be destroyed or forced to flee. At this point, Howard's P-51B Mustang still carried nearly 2,500 rounds of ammunition. Although the brutal minus 42 degrees Celsius temperature made gun jams from freezing a constant danger, he had no time to worry. Howard pulled the nose up and climbed back to 24,000 feet, seizing the central position to block enemy access to the bomber formation. Rather than clinging to the bombers in passive defense as escort doctrine dictated, Howard chose aggressive action. He transformed himself from guardian into hunter, charging directly at the leading German aircraft to shatter their coordination. Inside the cockpit, Howard remained absolutely calm, even as sweat beaded on his skin in the biting cold. He fully exploited the Mustang's speed advantage, up to 440 miles per hour, decisively faster than German fighters at high altitude. His tactic was clear: dive for lightning-fast attacks, use excess energy to disengage instantly, then climb again to set up the next hunt. After the astonishing opening 40 seconds, the skies over Oschersleben turned into a chaotic arena. The remaining German fighters now understood that this lone spoiler was a serious threat. Veteran Luftwaffe pilots, some decorated with the Knight's Cross, immediately altered their tactics to encircle Howard. The Germans split into small groups and employed classic maneuvers, one group acting as bait from above, another lying in wait below to seal off every escape route for the Mustang. The climax came at 11:17, when 3 Bf-109s suddenly charged straight at Howard head-on. It was an extremely dangerous frontal attack, with a combined closing speed exceeding 1,100 kilometers per hour. In that breathless moment, both sides opened fire simultaneously, and survival belonged only to the pilot with iron nerves and split-second reflexes. Howard did not evade. He held his course, patiently waiting until the enemy closed to 600 yards before squeezing the trigger. The 6 machine guns shuddered violently, unleashing a concentrated storm of fire straight into the nose of the lead Bf-109. The devastating power of the 50 caliber rounds tore through the armor, causing the German aircraft's engine to erupt in a cloud of white coolant, spraying like snow in the winter sky. The other 2 fighters panicked and broke away, unwilling to continue the head-on duel. Immediately, Howard yanked the aircraft into a hard turn, enduring up to 8 Gs of inertial force. The immense pressure drained blood from his brain, and his vision darkened for a split second. Yet his seasoned skill allowed him to recover instantly. He kicked the rudder forcefully, executing a tight, deceptive turn to latch on to the tail of another FW-190.
With a single short burst lasting just 3 seconds, Howard sheared off the German fighter's right wing. The FW-190 lost all lift and plunged straight down, spiraling through thick black smoke. 4 enemy aircraft had now been shot down, and the ammunition gauge on the Mustang was dropping rapidly. Inside the B-17 formation, belly turret gunner William Thompson, a veteran of 19 missions, could hardly believe his eyes. He counted at least 6 separate attack runs in just a few short minutes. The Mustang never stood still for a second. It dove, climbed, rolled, and looped continuously, always maintaining its role as an unyielding shield between the bombers and the enemy. Moved by this protection, B-17 pilot Robert Johnson keyed his radio to ask for the identity of the divine fighter, but received only silence in reply. Howard was far too focused on the fight for survival to answer. By 11:22, using the sun to blind his opponents, Howard lined up on an FW-190 leading a 4-ship element. He knew that knocking out the leader would shatter the formation. A precise burst threw the German flight into chaos like a flock of birds under sniper fire. Resisting any temptation to chase the fleeing aircraft, Howard immediately pulled up to prepare for the next attack. The Germans did not give up and continued to set new traps. A deadly pincer was formed. 4 aircraft acted as bait at 25,000 feet, while another group lurked below at 18,000 feet to cut off Howard's escape. Seeing through the scheme, Howard drove straight into the upper group at a staggering speed of over 770 kilometers per hour, pushing the P-51B to the limits of aerodynamic endurance. A sharp burst brought down the lead aircraft, forcing the German pilot to bail out into the freezing winter sky. As Howard hauled back on the stick to disengage, 7 Gs of force once again crushed his body, narrowing his vision into gray tunnels. Yet through superb skill, he maintained perfect control of the Mustang, rolled inverted, and plunged directly into the lower ambush group. Caught off guard by the bold head-on dive, the German commander panicked and ordered an evasive break, scattering the formation. Howard immediately latched on to the last aircraft and destroyed it with a short burst. It was his 6th kill. However, difficulties began to mount. At high altitude in -42°C temperatures, the machine guns, heated to hundreds of degrees by continuous firing, were suddenly exposed to bitter cold air, causing the metal to contract abruptly. At 11:26, the outermost right gun officially jammed. According to standard procedure, a pilot was supposed to disengage once weapons failed, but Howard stubbornly refused to leave. The German pilots were now both furious and increasingly cautious. They were completely bewildered by Howard's unusual flying style, highly variable rudder turns, and continuous aerobatic maneuvers that threw off every German firing solution. They began to suspect they were facing an entire Mustang squadron hidden somewhere nearby, unable to believe that a single lone aircraft would dare to attack an entire formation with such ferocity. When the ammunition count dropped to roughly 100 rounds per gun, Howard was forced to change tactics. He began making bold, feinting, head-on dives. With closing speeds exceeding 1,100 kilometers per hour, he did not fire immediately, instead using the Mustang itself as a threat of collision. Most German pilots lost their nerve, violently breaking away to avoid impact and inadvertently exposing vulnerabilities, allowing Howard to finish them with short, precise bursts from the few remaining guns. The situation worsened as the machine guns jammed one by one. From the original 6, Howard was down to 3 and eventually only 2 working guns.
He was forced to close to extremely short range, sometimes just a few dozen meters, to ensure every round struck its target. The Mustang itself was now covered in wounds. German bullets had pierced the stabilizer, control surfaces, and one 20mm cannon shell had punched through the wing root. The oxygen system flickered warning lights, and low pressure caused his hands to grow numb in the sub-zero cold. When the final rounds left the barrels, leaving him completely out of ammunition, he did the unthinkable. He continued attacking without weapons. He flew his aircraft tight onto the enemy's tail at distances of only 6 to 15 meters. In their rear-view mirrors, German pilots suddenly saw the Mustang's propeller looming right behind them. Believing this to be part of a larger trap, or that an entire American fighter squadron was hidden somewhere in the clouds, many German fighters panicked and fled, diving for lower altitude to escape. The battle had now entered its 33rd minute, an unimaginable duration for a lone dogfight. Howard was utterly exhausted. The oxygen system flashed red for low pressure. His hands were numb from the bone-chilling cold, and his vision occasionally blurred from oxygen deprivation. The fuel gauge showed only 28 gallons remaining, barely enough to reach base if no further fighting occurred. The Germans still had not completely given up. Luftwaffe Command ordered a final split. 8 fighters stayed behind to contain the crazy Mustang, while 9 others dove down to finish off the B-17 formation. They believed that with their opponent weakened, they could easily eliminate the spoiler and return to the primary target. Faced with a painful choice, Howard did not hesitate for a single second. Instead of staying to protect himself against the 8 enemies above, he pitched the nose down and dove to shield his 600 comrades from the 9 attacking fighters. At 19,000 feet, Howard closed in from behind the German formation leader. Despite having no ammunition left, he charged aggressively. The German pilot glanced into his mirror and saw the Mustang closing in without firing a shot. The terrifying silence triggered panic. He broke hard to the right, dragging the entire flight into a scattering evasive maneuver. The enemy formation disintegrated instantly. Howard pressed on, sliding in behind another FW-190 at a distance of just over 9 meters. Seeing the Mustang's propeller nearly touching his tail, the German pilot lost control and dove into the lower cloud layer to escape. Howard persisted in chasing 2 more aircraft, using the sheer ghostly presence of his plane to drive them off, forcing the entire enemy group to abandon the attack. The 8 German fighters above immediately dove down to assist their comrades. In this desperate moment, Howard decided to pull the nose up and meet them head-on. The Mustang's speed bled off rapidly, dropping from 190 knots to just 150 knots on the edge of an aerodynamic stall. With masterful technique, he hung the aircraft on its propeller, deceiving the Germans into firing too early, their streams of bullets passing just beneath the fuselage. Immediately afterward, Howard kicked the rudder left, pushed the nose down to regain energy, accelerated violently back to 300 knots, and pulled up again, leaving the entire enemy formation completely overshot. At exactly 11:44 a.m., small black dots appeared on the western horizon and rapidly grew larger. They were 36 P-47 Thunderbolts of the relief force charging in at high speed. Realizing their numerical advantage was gone, the German formation commander was forced to order a disengagement. The remaining 18 Luftwaffe fighters quietly turned east and headed back to their bases around Brunswick. They withdrew in shock, having lost at least 11 aircraft and pilots to a single lone Mustang. Only after seeing the Germans retreat did Howard finally allow himself to breathe. The Merlin engine began to run unevenly as fuel pressure dropped sharply. He immediately adjusted to maximum fuel conservation settings, eking out every last drop. The P-51B Mustang was now scarred with battle damage, its controls heavy and sluggish due to severe damage to the stabilizers. A passing P-47 pilot flew by and gave a thumbs up in admiration, but Howard only nodded faintly.
he was far too exhausted to respond. 33 minutes of breathless solo combat had come to an end. All 60 B-17s that Howard had directly protected returned safely. Not a single comrade was lost to Luftwaffe fire, thanks to the living shield named James Howard. As he crossed the English Channel at 12:23 p.m., the fuel gauge showed only 11 gallons remaining, a critically dangerous amount, enough for just a few more minutes of flight. Howard had to maintain steady altitude and avoid any unnecessary movements in a tense battle against gravity and a dying engine. At last, the English coastline came into view. The Mustang touched down at Boxstead Airfield at 12:51 p.m. The moment the aircraft rolled to a stop, the engine shut down completely, as if it had spent its final ounce of strength to bring the pilot home safely. Howard remained motionless in the cockpit for 10 seconds before climbing out. His legs trembled from cold, oxygen deprivation, and exhaustion after 4 continuous hours in the air. Sergeant Mechanic Henry Rudowski was stunned as he counted 37 bullet holes in the airframe, including 3 20mm cannon strikes. One of them lay just 15 centimeters from the main fuel tank, a razor-thin margin between life and death. When asked how many aircraft he had shot down, Howard merely shrugged modestly. Maybe 3 or 4. In the middle of all that chaos, it's hard to keep an exact count. He quietly walked toward the mess hall to rest, leaving behind mechanics who were still stunned as they inspected the frozen, jammed machine guns seized from extreme overuse.
News of the lone Mustang spread like wildfire throughout the 8th Air Force. Just hours after the B-17s landed safely at Deanthorpe, air crews crowded around intelligence officers to recount the unbelievable story. More than 18 independent reports from different aircraft described the same scene, a single P-51B fighting relentlessly for over half an hour, shielding the entire bomber formation from more than 30 German fighters. Not a single B-17 in the protected formation was shot down. 600 men returned to their families because one pilot refused to abandon them. The 8th Air Force immediately launched an official investigation, cross-checking gun camera footage from every Mustang on the mission, reviewing mission logs, and collecting eyewitness testimony. The conclusion was clear and indisputable. Only one P-51 from the 354th Fighter Group had stayed with the bombers for that long. It was aircraft serial number 436315, flown by none other than Major James H. Howard. When war correspondents surrounded Howard, he replied calmly, "I was just doing my job as an escort fighter." But those aboard the Flying Fortresses that day knew what he had done was far more than just a mission. It was a miracle in a sky ablaze with fire. Just 2 days after the legendary mission, on January 13, 1944, Lieutenant General Ira L. Eaker, commander of the 8th Air Force, personally flew to RAF Boxstead. He wanted to meet with his own eyes the pilot who had accomplished the impossible. Before the senior general, Howard remained astonishingly humble. He recounted the battle briefly, estimating only 3 or 4 victories, and admitting he had resorted to tricks after running completely out of ammunition. After hearing this account and comparing it with the emotional reports from B-17 crews, General Eaker understood that this was a rare act of heroism. That very evening, he signed the recommendation to award Howard the Medal of Honor, the highest decoration in the United States military. Normally, the approval process for the Medal of Honor could take years, but Howard's sacrifice was so undeniable that it required only 6 weeks. On March 6, 1944, under the windswept skies of England, Major James Howard officially received the nation's highest honor. Howard entered history as the only fighter pilot in the European theater to be awarded the Medal of Honor during the entirety of World War II. The world honored him not merely for the German aircraft he destroyed, but for the image of a lone Mustang, out of ammunition, still charging fearlessly into a pack of wolves to protect 600 comrades behind him. It was the purest proof of a timeless creed. Never leave your wingman behind, even if the price is your own life. James Howard's extraordinary feat on January 11th was not only a personal miracle, it became a turning point that completely reshaped the air war over Europe. Before this event, American fighters were constrained by a doctrine of passive defense, forced to cling tightly to bomber formations like shepherds guarding sheep, making themselves easy interception targets. Howard's aggressive, proactive style demonstrated a new tactical mindset. Fighters needed to be unleashed to hunt and destroy the enemy at distance before they could threaten the bombers. This shift in thinking sparked a revolution in equipment. Within 3 months, 14 of the 15 fighter groups in the 8th Air Force transitioned to the P-51 Mustang. The results were dramatic. Bomber loss rates plunged from 9% in late 1943 to less than 2% by the spring of 1944.
Thanks to its exceptional range, over 700 miles, Mustang squadrons could escort bombers deep into the heart of Berlin and return safely. This completely shattered the Luftwaffe's air superiority and salvaged the Allied strategic bombing campaign, which had been on the verge of collapse. It can truly be said that the unbreakable spirit of one lone pilot that day ignited an overwhelming air power that directly led to Allied victory in Europe. The 354th Fighter Group, the Pioneer Mustangs, went on to write their own epic, achieving 701 aerial victories. They became the highest-scoring American fighter group in Europe, producing 42 ace pilots. Yet their glory was also soaked in blood and tears. 60 pilots were lost, and 128 P-51s never returned. As for James Howard, his legacy lies not only in statistics, but in the deep human bonds of comradeship. 1 week after the battle, air crews from the 401st Bomb Group traveled all the way to his base just to thank him in person. Gunner William Thompson, who had watched Howard in awe from the belly turret, said emotionally that he owed Howard his life. Years later, Thompson named his firstborn son James as a tribute to the guardian angel of that day. James Howard did not stop at Austerleben. He flew 26 more missions, bringing his total tally to 17 victories across both the Asian and European theaters. After the war, he contributed his hard-earned experience to the development of air combat tactics for the Korean War, eventually retiring with the rank of Brigadier General in 1966. His memoir, The Roar of the Tiger, became the final legacy he left behind, chronicling his journey from the P-40s of the Flying Tigers to the brilliant P-51 Mustang over the skies of Germany. James Howard passed away in his hometown in 1995 at the age of 84. He was gone, but the story of a lone pilot who dared to challenge an entire armada remains one of the brightest chapters in the history of world aviation. The legacy James Howard left behind is not merely the Medal of Honor hanging on a wall, but a living lesson for every generation of fighter pilots to follow. He distilled the golden principles of air combat. Controlled aggression is the key to victory. Speed is life. Altitude is life insurance. And above all, never abandon your comrades. He proved to the world that when advanced technology is combined with unparalleled courage and an unbreakable human will, even the most impossible adversity can be overcome. His name became a gold standard, a benchmark by which modern fighter pilots continue to measure themselves and strive to reach. This is the epic of Major James Howard and the legendary Ding Hao, the pilot who single-handedly turned the skies over Germany into a nightmare for 30 enemies in exchange for a safe path home for 600 comrades. His story will forever stand as a reminder that even in the darkest moments, a single individual can still change the course of history.